Picture yourself flying barely above the treetops, maybe 100 feet off the ground. The side of the helicopter is wide open, and you're leaning out with nothing but a machine gun separating you from the chaos below. 2,000 rounds of ammunition are stacked beside you, and all that keeps you connected to the aircraft is a strap hooked into the fuselage. The enemy's rifles are already aimed skyward, and somewhere out there, a rocket-propelled grenade or a 23mm cannon is waiting to find its mark. That was the reality for the door gunners of Vietnam, men who lived in a constant state of fear and resolve, balancing enormous firepower with equally enormous vulnerability. When the United States first escalated its involvement in Vietnam, helicopter crews were usually composed of a pilot, a co-pilot, and a crew chief. In the early months, the crew chief often doubled as the sole door gunner, leaning out to return fire with an M60. But as the conflict intensified and losses mounted, commanders realized that one man on one side simply wasn't enough. A fourth crew member was introduced, the so-called shotgun rider. Half hanging out of the door, his body tethered by a monkey harness, he became one of the most exposed and endangered figures in the entire war. Despite the dangers, the missions these men carried out were indispensable. They flew countless sorties, escorting troop carriers, protecting medevacs, providing cover fire during insertions and extractions, and suppressing enemy positions hidden beneath the jungle canopy. Their presence often meant the difference between a helicopter making it back or going down in flames. Becoming a door gunner required more than just knowing how to pull a trigger. Recruits underwent crash courses in communication, navigation, and situational awareness. They had to learn the intercom system, assist the crew chief with maintenance tasks, and master the clock system, a method of quickly relaying enemy positions to the pilots. Formation flying was another key skill. In combat, helicopters rarely traveled alone, and each gunner had to be able to cover not only his own bird, but also protect others in the group. Their primary weapon was the M60 machine gun, a weapon capable of unleashing 500 to 650 rounds per minute, with an effective range of more than 1,200 yards. The M60 was often mounted on a swivel pintle, or attached to the ceiling with a bungee cord, giving the gunner flexibility to swing and aim in wide arcs. Gunships carried even more devastating firepower, including the M134 minigun, a weapon capable of firing an astonishing 6,000 rounds per minute. Depending on the mission, a gunner might have between 2,000 and 4,000 rounds available, and every fifth round was typically a tracer to guide their aim. But having that much firepower didn't make the job easy. Firing accurately from a helicopter was a science in itself. The aircraft was always vibrating, banking, or weaving to avoid ground fire. Gunners had to compensate for the forward momentum of the helicopter, meaning they often had to aim slightly ahead or below their targets. The training manuals recommended short, controlled bursts of 5 to 7 rounds, but in real combat, volume of fire often mattered more than precision. Suppression was the key, keeping the enemy's heads down long enough for the helicopter to do its job. Protection for these men was laughably inadequate. Unlike tanks or armored personnel carriers, helicopters couldn't be weighed down with heavy plating. The fuselage itself was made of thin aluminum that could be punctured with a fist, let alone enemy bullets. Flak jackets were issued, but they offered only minimal defense against shrapnel and were useless against direct hits from rifles. Some gunners were given ceramic chicken plates, meant to protect the chest from small arms fire. But these were bulky, uncomfortable, and many chose to leave them behind. Helmets had built-in intercoms, but were designed more for communication than for defense. In essence, the only real protection a door gunner had was his firepower and his crew's ability to get in and out quickly. Missions were designed with speed in mind. Fly low, unload troops or supplies, provide suppressive fire, and get back out before the enemy could organize a counterattack. Veterans often described their days as 90% boredom and 10% sheer terror. Hours could be spent flying over endless stretches of jungle, staring into the thick canopy below, searching for the faintest sign of movement. Most of the time, nothing happened. But when something did, the calm shattered instantly. Ambushes were sudden, brutal, and often deadly. One moment the jungle was silent, the next it erupted with machine gun fire, RPGs, and tracer rounds streaking past the open doors. Takeoffs and landings in so-called hot landing zones were especially dangerous. As helicopters hovered just above the ground to drop off troops or pick up the wounded, gunners had to unleash torrents of fire to keep the enemy at bay. They couldn't stop shooting, not even for a moment, because if they did, the entire crew could be wiped out. Snipers and RPG teams specifically targeted door gunners, knowing that removing them left the helicopter far more vulnerable. Medical evacuation missions, the dust-offs, were perhaps the most harrowing. Although international law dictated that medevac helicopters should be off-limits, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese often ignored those conventions. Dust-offs flew directly into active firefights to pick up the wounded. Door gunners not only defended the aircraft, but also helped haul injured soldiers aboard, often under fire themselves. In many cases, they had to decide who could be taken and who had to wait, choices that would haunt them forever. Stories from the field paint a vivid picture of the chaos these men endured. There are accounts of gunners whose harnesses snapped or who forgot to clip in, only to be thrown out of the helicopter during evasive maneuvers. Sometimes they dangled helplessly from their straps, waiting for their comrades to drag them back inside. Others weren't so fortunate and fell to their deaths. One story tells of a gunner who, after neutralizing a group of enemy fighters, leapt from the helicopter to help a wounded man. He neglected to tell the rest of the crew, and by the time he turned around, his helicopter was gone. Alone, unarmed, and surrounded by hostile jungle, he had to wait half an hour before his bewildered crew returned to retrieve him. In another incredible incident, a gunner thrown from a helicopter during a low-altitude maneuver landed directly on 2 Viet Cong soldiers. Stunned but alive, he wrestled one of their weapons away and managed to kill them both before being rescued. For his bravery and improbable survival, he was later awarded a medal. Even when gravely wounded, many gunners kept firing until their last breath. Accounts exist of men holding their triggers down with bloody hands, determined to protect their crew until the very end. Such courage was the hallmark of the position, and it was recognized by everyone who flew with them. If the physical dangers weren't enough, the mental strain was overwhelming. Gunners had to make split-second decisions on whether to fire, often without knowing if their target was truly the enemy. The Viet Cong were masters of camouflage, blending into the jungle and often disguising themselves as civilians. Some fighters were as young as 12. With no night vision or advanced optics, gunners relied solely on their eyes and instincts. Mistakes were inevitable, and many lived with the burden of knowing they might have killed innocents. The constant exposure to death and destruction left deep scars. Post-traumatic stress disorder was common among returning veterans, though it was poorly understood at the time. Many struggled with nightmares, flashbacks, and survivor's guilt. Alcohol and drug abuse were frequent coping mechanisms. Society's lack of understanding of the Vietnam War compounded the trauma. Instead of being welcomed as heroes, many veterans returned home to indifference or outright hostility. Despite the immense cost, the role of the door gunner shaped modern military aviation. Their bravery and sacrifices proved the necessity of heavily armed helicopters in modern warfare. The improvisations made in the jungles of Vietnam, from strapping M60s to bungee cords to creating full-fledged gunships, directly influenced the development of the AH-1 Cobra, the first true attack helicopter. This aircraft, sleek and purpose-built, replaced the vulnerable Hueys in many combat roles and became a cornerstone of air cavalry tactics. The door gunners of Vietnam may have been young and unprepared for the horrors they faced, but their courage under fire set a standard that endures to this day. They were the thin line between survival and disaster for countless missions, and their contributions continue to echo in the tactics and technologies of today's armed forces. The job of a Vietnam War door gunner was one of the most dangerous assignments a soldier could receive. With little protection, immense responsibility, and the constant threat of death, these men stood as both shields and swords for their crews. Their bravery not only saved lives in the heat of battle, but also helped shape the very nature of modern combat aviation. For many, the war never truly ended, but their legacy is one of enduring sacrifice and unmatched courage.